I remember when, last past November, when the Clown King got pounded in with the Timberland. They left him trembling, he was not remembering. Never tucked no denim in, just a frosted envelope. Some would debate, wait, the fella ate gelatin, or even listening to what his weatherman was telling him. When I could feel it in my melanin, it's compelling us to break them off, no reassembling, no science fiction to no getting near you. Coming soon to fuck with you frequently like how phases of the moon would do. You can gather around like it was an eclipse, just don't look directly to the bitch. You may be blinded by the scripts. Past the L, the last tells us an absurd tale. All hail, King Ghidra, the third rail. 700 volts holds rap to a standstill. Fool, ignore the rule, fuck up and get his man killed. 2 bottles of dog got his hands filled. And so goes the days of our lives as the hourglass sand spill. Anvil with passion and the glass of the say.
And the lights went down.
And I knew it was the last day. Wig twisting season, where some could get their wig twisted back within reason. Mostly whiskey crimes of treason, and you'll be lucky if there's no squeezing. Even this evening, from how it's feeling, thrilling choice of flow is sick. He's the villain with the $1 million voice throat trick. He's like a ventriloquist with his fists in the speakers back. Couldn't think of no unique track, no sneak attack. It don't really matter how big them is, so much as a nipple. Cause you could have a chick with D triple, set the nipple little. That's hot off the griddle, like how he do monkey rhymes, like monkey in the middle by his damn self. Ain't no average MC ahead of me, getting cheddar instead of the probably better pedigree. With nicknames, sick games as Rick James, messy games, side fly such as Jesse James. Glass I figure, ass hawking ass kitty liquor, last one to walk up in, fast talking city slicker, got bag cause of the dirty chick with makeup, bail out quick for the 7:30 wake up. My only backup was an A cup. As far as Mason when the leaves turn red and gold, so Nimrod Earth Day. All else worthless to say.
And the lights went down.
That's when I knew it was the first day. Wig twisting season, where some could get their wig twisted back within reasoning. Mostly with the crimes of treason, men. And y'all be lucky if there's no squeezing even this evening. It's like a mosquito, the much sweeter, resent the act. I've been bent back since my physical went back, since culture more of my kin. And for them, I keep an elbow in this hellhole. Hold your head, use your head and hold, or be dead and cold. In the worstest way, soon as the leaves show red and gold, till round Nimrod release day. And all else, needless to say. Wait a motherfucking minute, true facts presented. The names was probably changed just to protect who ain't in it. The XP was 3/4 tenant, 4/5 was converted. Where his shit was twisted, ask him if I heard it.
And the lights went down.
Wig twisting season, where some could get their wigs twisted back within reasoning. Mostly with the crimes of lying and fronting and cheating. All types of different styles of treason.
King Ghidorah is completely controlled by our computers through magnetic waves.
Fly tramp, That's what she called me, cause I don't wear no Stetson hats like Paul C. As y'all see, who give a fuck who know what is it? These styles will be flipped to the absolute exquisite. It's like a blizzard. Soon as I got home from ATL, looked into my baby face, my boo was like, well, I know your types and clientele, thoughts, needs, as I held her firmly yet gentle as a soft seed. She said, the one with the horse weave, the pretty one, or crazy hot to touch the tattoo through the short sleeve. Which one you want? I'm like, if there was comp, fuck around, a nigga like me, probably run up in all three. King Ghidra, what they call me, either Caesar or Baldy. Probably half Moose slash y'all saw me on the D-Lo. I slaughter solo MCs, they paper thin, in they Polo Nautica or DK men. Amen. It's funny how significance make a difference. Notice parables of three and every other inference. For instance, who wants to battle?
Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Sean Delaney, and I am a media producer at the Enoch Pratt Free Library, specializing in the Pratt's Writers Live and Brown Lecture Series. Just a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. We will have a 45-minute conversation followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from all of you. We have a microphone there and there. Please use the microphones as we have an audience viewing online. This allows them to stay part of the conversation. We also have Greedy Reads selling books outside. I'm sure you saw them coming in. They will be there and they will be able to sell you books that you could then get signed after the program, if you so wish. Tonight, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome S.H. Fernando to the Pratt stage to discuss his newest book, The Chronicles of DOOM, Unraveling Rap's Masked Iconoclast. Fernando's work discusses the life and career of Daniel Dumile Jr., one of hip-hop's most elusive and mysterious figures, following his unexpected death in 2020. Making music the focal point of the work, Fernando deftly lays out the history of East Coast rap against Doom's life story and dissects the personas, projects, and tracks, as well as the lyrics that led to his immortality. S.H. Fernando Jr., also known as SKIZ, is a graduate of Harvard University and Columbia University School of Journalism. He is the author of From the Streets of Shaolin, The Wu-Tang Saga, and his work has appeared in the New York Times, the Rolling Stone, and the Source. Fernando is the founder of his own independent record label, Word Sound, and he has also worked as a record producer, rapper, and electronica artist under the alias Spectre. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Cullen Nowalowski. Nowalowski is a worker owner at the Red Emma's Bookstore Coffee House, which he helped found in 2004. For 3 decades, he has been a performer, promoter, and patron of independent music, from metal and experimental noise to indie dance pop and global house. He's made sporadic forays into journalism and is an amateur archivist and collector of subcultural and countercultural ephemera. Please put your hands together and welcome me in introducing both Fernando and Nowalowski to the stage.
In an instant, get smoked like Winston cigarettes. Hoes get ripped off like Nicorette. In real life, the real tripe scene.
Hello, welcome. And it is my honor to be joining once again SKIZ Fernando. We did the launch a few weeks ago at Red Emma's, and since that time, he's been around the country, doing the rounds, doing some media appearances as well. So I'm sure he's learned some stuff in that time, as well as, definitely gotten to meet some people who are mentioned in the book and get some feedback on it. So let's get right into it. SKIZ. So
can I just say something before we start? First of all, I'm just thrilled to be at the Pratt tonight. I'm a hometown guy, grew up in Baltimore, lived here most of my life. And when I was a kid, my mom used to take us every weekend to the Pratt, check out books. That's where I developed a love of reading, a love of books. I still come here to the Central Branch every weekend. So thanks for showing a hometown kid a nice welcome here. I appreciate it.
And that's something you share with Doom. That love of reading, that love of knowledge, that forever quest for new information. And you also share some other things like having multiple aliases and being around in the 90s hip hop scene, in the underground, in the far underground of New York. So yeah, well, let's get into it. What is it that drew you to Doom? Because, you know, you definitely have worked, you did that Woo book, you wrote a book on hip hop in the 90s, you were doing hip hop journalism in the 90s, but what was it that drew you to Doom and made you decide you wanted to put together this definitive biography?
Yeah, I should also mention in '94 I wrote a book called The New Beats, exploring the music, culture, and attitudes of hip hop. It was probably like the third serious book about hip hop to ever come out. So that was like '94. I was kind of left out. But as far as Doom is concerned, you know, as you said, I spent the '90s living in New York, and I was covering the hip hop scene mainly for The Source. Also, there's a whole bunch of magazines back then, Vibe, Rolling Stone, you know, a bunch of hip hop magazines, Rap Pages, Double XL. So there was a lot going on in the 90s, a lot of groups to cover. For my first book, The New Beats, I interviewed about 100 artists, you know, it was because New York back then was pretty much the rap capital. Unfortunately, it's kind of funny. I never crossed paths with Doom during that time, because at the time he was in a group with his younger brother Sub Rock. You might remember a group called KMD. Does anyone remember KMD? All right, Peach Fuzz, that was their big hit. But even before Peach Fuzz, there was a group called Third Base signed to Def Jam, one of the first white groups, MC Search and Pete Nice. And they were the ones who actually put Doom on the single Gas Phase, which became a gold single. And that was kind of Doom's first introduction to the music industry. And from that, just from appearing on that single, he got the deal for his own group, KMD. So I was a big fan of KMD back in the day. And, you know, they put out their first album, Mr. Hood, with Peach Fuzz on it. That was the hit. That was a hit single. They were getting ready to do a second album, and during that, Doom's younger brother Sub passed by, you know, through very mysterious circumstances. Doom then had to complete the album himself, which he did, but then when he turns it in, it's rejected because of controversial artwork. So at that time, he lost his record deal too. So he had this double whammy. He loses his partner, his best friend, his brother, and he loses his record deal. So he goes underground for a few years, and then he reinvents himself as MF Doom in the late 90s. Like 97, he started putting out his first singles. So I didn't even know that this guy, his original MC name was Zevlov X when he was with KMD. I didn't even know that this MC, this mysterious MC called MF Doom, was the reincarnation of Zevlov X. And of course, as soon as I found out, I was like following his career all through the 2000s, and I was just as shocked as anyone else when I found out about his passing I found out about it December 31st, 2020. He had actually passed 2 months earlier, but they didn't announce it. So immediately, I'm just kind of stunned, because this is a kid who's younger than me. He had a whole career ahead of him, and you know, there's all these podcasts coming out talking about Doom. I was reacquainted with his whole career. And I just thought, wow, this guy led such an incredible life. You know, this guy, if anyone deserves a book, it's Doom. So that was, long story short, that was the genesis of the project. That's when I decided to do the book, as soon as I found out that he had passed, because I was like, you know, more people got to know about this guy. So.
And you just kind of briefly sketched out that sort of arc, his public arc. But one thing you do discuss in the book, and I find very interesting, And it also leads to an insight about the character of Doom, which is that he is someone, you may know the song Deep Fried Friends. If you know that song and then you see his life, you'll see how much he adheres to it, in the sense that there are people from that very early stage in his life that he continued to work with, and they continue to kind of pop up and collaborate for decades with him. Lord Scotch, Curious, some other folks. So can you talk a little bit about the crew, not Third Base or KMD, but the crew that preceded his public life, and who was in that, and then kind of how they came through his life at different points?
All right. Well, if you want to, going back to high school, you know, he's from Long Beach, Long Island, which is just over the border from Queens. So it's kind of like suburbia. It's a little nicer than living in the city. During high school, he had a crew called GYP, which was Get Yours Posse. And that was just neighborhood kids who had gone to high school with them. It was basically, you know, a hip hop crew. Everyone was involved in one of the elements of hip hop, whether it be breakdancing or writing graffiti or emceeing or DJing. So that was like his early crew in Long Beach, Long Island. Then when he got into the industry, he hooked up with this crew called the CM Fam, who were from uptown Manhattan. And that, as you said, is like Curious George, Lord Sear. Bobito Garcia was a guy who, one of the early employees of Def Jam. He also had a radio show in New York at the time, which was popping, called the Stretch Armstrong and Bobito Show. It was a big underground show. If you were in New York in the early 90s, you no doubt know that show, because they used to have all these up and coming artists on the radio, freestyling. You know, you name an artist from the 90s and they were up on that show. Biggie, Wu-Tang, Nas, they were all up there. Zev Love X and Sub Rock of KMD. So this was kind of his extended crew, and it also included people like from the West Coast, like Del the Funky Homo Sapien from Oakland, and the Hieroglyphics crew, who were all from Oakland. They were also signed to Elektra. Then, you know, like Busta Rhymes, when he was with Leaders of the New School, they were on Elektra. They toured with KMD early on. De La Soul toured early on. So he was very much, you know, in the industry. It's funny, there's a picture of those early days, and he was at a record release party for NWA, and you see like Eazy-E and Dr. Dre posing with him and Pete Nice. So he was like pretty much in there, you know, he was pretty much in the industry, and he knew all of these other MCs, and the people that he was closest to, obviously, like Curious, like Del. These are people that he just stayed with for the rest of his life. And even people in CM crew who did not rap, like one of Doom's best friends was this guy, Alfred Gordon, aka Big Ben Klingon, who was his hype man and eventually his manager. So, you know, it's just like the people that you come up with are the people that you trust and the people who are loyal to you. So like Doom just kept that crew close to him for the whole rest of his career.
Yeah, you mentioned Brand Nubian, who were label mates. On the track Nitty Gritty on the first KMD album, they introduced themselves as a crew called the God Squad. Brand Nubian notably were part of the Nation of Gods and Earths, sometimes known as the 5% Nation. KMD were not, but they used that language. They were part of another group. So can you talk a little bit about that group, but also his spiritual influences before that came from his family?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, Doom was born in 71. At that time, his parents were both Nation of Islam at that time, and it was kind of pretty common at that time, because like the Nation of Islam had a big influence, as you said, the 5%ers, the Nation of Gods and Earth, which is kind of a splinter group of that. And then there was another group called the Ansar Allah community, okay, which was headed by a guy by the name of Dr. Malachi York. And these people all kind of known in New York in the 70s and 80s. A lot of hip hop is influenced by the 5%ers, you know. Probably the best example of 5%ers is Wu-Tang. Each and every member of Wu-Tang is a 5%er. And the way that they differ from the Nation of Islam is the 5%ers believe that the black man is God, basically. That's like the one main difference between the 5%ers and the Nation of Islam. They follow the same supreme wisdom lessons and stuff like that, but the person who started the 5%ers, Clarence 13X, was kind of a renegade Nation of Islam in that, you know, the Nation of Islam is very disciplined. They don't drink alcohol. They don't do drugs. Clarence 13X was like a gambler. He smoked weed. He drank. You know, he was basically from the streets, and he brought the message of the Nation of Islam to basically the kids on the street, because you had to jump through a lot of hoops to become official member of the Nation of Islam. Now, Dr. York was kind of completely outside that, and the Ansar Allah community, even though they had kind of the trappings of Islam, it was kind of it's very difficult to follow them because they were into the Christian stuff, they were into Hebrew stuff, they were into Islam, they were into Egyptology, ufology, Rosicrucianism. So they were all over the place, and you can kind of see where Doom got his love for all of this esoteric thinking and knowledge, because Dr. York was kind of all over the place as far as like spirituality and, you know, all of these concepts. So Doom. Oh, and another thing I should mention is Jay-Z was kind of like an adherent of the Ansars early on. His partner, the Jazz, yeah. You know, when Jay-Z was just a hype man, the Jazz, there's a video you can watch, and it's filmed in Bushwick, Brooklyn, at this one block that the Ansars controlled. It's got, you know, they were also like a very disciplined group. The women wore, or the men wore white robes and kufis, and the women, you know, covered their heads and everything. And they had their own beliefs. But another interesting thing about them was that Dr. York, while he was a spiritual leader, he was also an R&B musician, and he had a recording studio.
And this ended up being helpful to KMD,
because they had the Ansars had a compound in upstate New York, and where Dr. York had a studio, and that's where they were recording the second album. Eventually, the Ansars moved down to Atlanta. They bought some land outside of Atlanta, and that's where they settled. But that's basically, you know, New York is obviously where Doom and his brother got. And on the first album, Operation Doomsday, there's a picture of Doom and his brother in these long white robes with the kufis, selling, you know, they used to basically sell all Dr. York's pamphlets at subway stops and sell incense and perfume and stuff like that. So
I'm from Philadelphia, so I definitely encountered members that also known as the Nubian Islamic Hebrew Mission, a few other names. So I actually bought literature from them and stuff. So I felt I was hearing KMD talk about this stuff, and I felt like I had some insight that a lot of people was kind of going over people's heads. I mean, he's got gold records, so it's selling nationwide. So it's not just to people who are aware of this stuff. Now, the themes get a little less in your face on the second KMD album, and then they, when he comes back as Doom, the way he approaches his themes are very different. What happened beyond getting dropped and losing his brother? What went on? That's one of the big parts of this book that hasn't really been chronicled much. Is that time, that 4 or 5 year gap between him as a public figure. At least people knew that Black Bastards, the second KMD album, was supposed to come out. There were some articles about it. Then he kind of faded away and came back. So what happened in that time?
Okay, that's a good question. The missing years, basically from May 94 to about, say, November 97, when the first MF Doom single came out as a white label on Bobbito's Fondle. So there's roughly 3 years. In interviews, Doom says I was pretty much near homeless, but I did a lot of research. I talked to a lot of people, especially his other younger brother, Dimbaza, who was around at that time. And basically what happened was when Doom got the pink slip from Elektra, they also gave him kind of a severance check, like $20,000, $25,000. So he had a little money in his pocket. He got an apartment in Manhattan, and he still had his equipment and stuff. So he was making beats and stuff. But, he was devastated by the loss of his brother because that was his partner. I mean, who wouldn't be? This is, they worked on the music together. Doom was more of the MC. Sub Rock was more the producer. So kind of Doom had to kind of step it up, kind of step it up on production and kind of learn that whole side of it. But he basically, to support himself during this time, he was selling drugs, and I always think it's interesting that he never talks about that. Like, Doom is probably the only rapper you'll ever meet who does not brag about selling drugs. And that says a lot about him, I found out that he was not only was he selling drugs, he was also doing a lot of drugs, but he was doing psychedelics. He was doing a lot of mescaline and LSD and stuff like that. And, these are not your usual recreational drugs. These are, if you've ever done psychedelics, it's a pretty heavy experience. You can experience your own death, and stuff like that. So it's not something to be messed with. But these guys, Doom and his brother, were eating LSD like candy back then. And they were just basically tripping out and grieving over the loss of their brother. At the same time, Doom is kind of scheming in his mind, like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? It's like, and he actually basically concocted the whole plan to come back during that time that he was out of the industry. And basically everything that he said he was going to do, he did. He said, he had his little bout with fame as a teenager in high school, and he was like, this is not happening like this anymore. When I come back, I'm gonna cover my face. I'm gonna wear a mask so no one knows who I am, and I can have my personal life, and then I'll wear the mask on stage. That's gonna fix this problem with fame, because he really did not like the whole fame thing. He was much more of an introvert, much more of a kind of a laid back guy. Didn't like to be out there. So this was a plan that he actually told to several people. When I come back, I'm going to wear a mask, and no one's going to know my name. Another thing that he kind of another kind of innovation that he came up with was the fact that he never represented himself as an MC. He never represented himself as a rapper. When you see Doom interviews, he always says, "I'm a writer." Okay. And this is an important distinction, because when you're a writer, you can write for any character, okay? You don't have to be the person that you're writing about, which is basically everyone else in rap. Everyone else is like, I'm the man, and everyone's like, me, I do this, I do that. Doom is the only rapper I know who raps in the third person. He says he did this, he did that, Doom did this, Doom. But he's not Doom. He's Daniel Dumile. That's who he is. But being a writer, he can develop and inhabit any character. So MF Doom was just one of his characters that he wrote for. He also wrote for King Ghidorah. And if you go back to the old Godzilla flicks, King Ghidorah was Godzilla's nemesis. So he's still the villain, you know. If you know your Marvel comics, Doctor Doom was the nemesis of Fantastic Four, right? So Doom kind of, one thing that's that all of Doom's characters have in common is that they're villainous. They're the villain. They're the bad guy. Okay. Doom called himself the supervillain. But here's another great innovation that he did, because borrowing from the whole Marvel concept, you get these villains like Doctor Doom who are, there's a real gray area. Are they really bad? Are they good? You know, Doctor Doom, the character Doctor Doom, when he takes over the world, one of the first things he does is abolish apartheid in South Africa. So it's like, how bad can he be, right? So Doom plays with that in all of his aliases. He plays with that character, that gray area between good and bad. So that's just like another one of the kind of innovations that he brought to the art form of emceeing.
Yeah, and I felt at the time, you know, when Doom's first music was coming out and he was characterizing himself as the villain, and he would say things like, you know, definition supervillain, a killer who loves children, one who is well skilled in destruction as well as building, you know, or a villain in your land, in his land, a ruler. You know, at the time of the 90s, before the sort of onset of the Bush era and everything that occurred in it, there were these figures on the global stage like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein or people like that. And I felt that there was also a commentary on the broader geopolitical system in that, which he only tends to discuss in this sort of implicit sense, although on a song like Strange Ways, he makes it much more overt, and that's one of the few times where he does that. Until maybe about 10 years later, I've been digging into the JJ Doom stuff, and he's really in his conspiracy bag on that one.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're first confronted with Doom, the main thing that you're getting from him is just humor. I mean, he's just so funny. His rhymes are so funny. It's like you just get one gag and then he's on to the next, you know, and it's like you have to actually sit down and, like, I had to actually print out his lyrics to really appreciate it, because as you said, he'll drop a reference in there and you're like, like, who is Henrietta Lacks? You know, like Doom is that MC who will actually make you pick up a book and do some research. By the way, does anyone know who Henrietta Lacks is? Good, because she's from Baltimore, okay? And she was an African-American lady who had cancer, and her cells were used against her wishes for medical research by Johns Hopkins. And I think they just came out recently and apologized to her family. But can you imagine like an MC dropping that in his lyric? So like what you're saying, Doom is not, he's not overtly political, or he's not like in your face about anything, but he'll just drop these little hints, little things that'll make you pick up a book and question, oh, what's this all about? But really the thrust of his whole thing is just humor. And I think that's why he attracts people from so many different demographics and stuff like that, because humor is universal, you know. And he's also one of the only MCs who's like self-deprecating, who can laugh at himself, you know. It's like in this art form where everyone takes himself so seriously, Doom just kind of just busted that mold, you know. And it's just like, to me that's like at the heart of his appeal.
A rather ugly brother with flows that's gorgeous.
Exactly. The
So
clever nerd, best MC without a chain you ever heard.
So what was I really like the way you kind of laid out this book, where you sort of dedicated chapters. You have sort of the early life, but then you kind of go chapter by chapter, album by album, because each album is its whole own story. So how'd you land on that in terms of, laying out the book? How'd you decide on that kind of approach?
Yeah, the book is divided into 5 sections: the man, the myth, the mask, the music, the legend. Okay. And as you said, it's kind of linear, but it's non-linear, because I start off with his youth, his early life. I take it, through the missing years, through the reinvention of MF Doom. And then boom, the music section is where I go into pretty much each and every album. Also talking about what's going on in hip hop at the time, giving you a lot of context, because Doom did not exist in a vacuum, right? Doom came at a time in the late 90s, the early 2000s, when basically the major labels were like really controlling the art form, but at the same time there was a very healthy underground movement going on. And to me, Doom was like the underground champ. He was the king of the underground at that time. From like 2000 to 2005, he put out 8 records on 8 different independent labels. I mean, who does that, Doom was never on a major label. And it's usually artists on major labels who get the hype, who get the promotion, who everyone knows about. But yet, releasing records independently, he was still able to win an audience and make an impact. And, for someone who ran an independent label for 15 years, and it was just like banging my head against the wall on how to promote my records, promote my artists, I see Doom and it's like, wow, man, I that's incredible that you are able to do this. So, yeah, the book is, I wanted to, I like, sometimes I like an oral history where it's just, people giving quotes. But in this instance, there's so much that you have to know about Doom just to start. So like the myth section is where I go into his influences. I talk about Dr. York. I talk about the Marvel universe. I even put out the whole origin story of Dr. Doom, so you can kind of contrast it to Daniel Dumile's personal story. There's so many parallels, so many crossovers. And I think I'm most proud of the fact that I'm giving you a lot of context here. You're getting a whole history of the underground hip hop scene and the hip hop scene as it was happening. So you kind of have to know about this stuff to put Doom, to see, just put Doom in his place and see where he fits in. And these days he's called your favorite rapper's favorite rapper, and that's, to me, that's incredible too, because like I said, this guy was never on a major label. He never sold more than 350,000 copies of an album. Back in the days when dudes were selling 500,000, 1 million copies. I know it sounds weird now because these are the bygone days of the music industry, but that's what it was like. And for someone to just do that kind of damage on independent labels is just incredible. So, I have to salute this guy. He was prolific. He was creative. He had a super vivid imagination, and he just gave so much back to this art form that we love, and also to the culture. It's like, so Doom was a giant,
And that's definitely, he was hip hop to the bone. He's constantly just, there's so many references to the early days of hip hop and the early figures and these kind of oblique twists on other MCs' lines and things of that nature. But he also transcended hip hop. And I don't say that to to belittle hip hop, because hip hop is one of the greatest cultural gifts of all time. But he also had love and collaboration from Beck, Tom York, Beth Gibbons from Portishead, like all the electronic musicians, classical musicians, jazz artists, R&B artists, they all gravitated towards him. They all found something of value in his work, but also he worked with them. He was not shy about reaching outside of a certain sound. Why do you think that is? What is it? When you kind of came across this aspect of Doom, what were your thoughts on it?
Well, all I would say is that you're 100% right. I mean, this is a guy, usually when artists, hit kind of like a stride in their career, they follow the same formula and they pretty much coast through their career. And it's like, that's what you get, To me, Doom is like this. His trajectory is like this because he was constantly innovating, constantly elevating. As you said, some of those latter albums that he did, like J.J. Doom and Born Like This, the beats on there are sick. It's like nothing else in hip hop, and he was not afraid to mess with that kind of material. Basically, to me, Doom represents kind of freedom, artistic freedom. He did not go by what everyone else. He didn't follow the crowd, basically, And to me, that represents the original kind of essence of hip hop, from the golden era days. That's what I see in common. Like every group, every artist was different. And by golden era, I'm talking maybe like 86 to 97. Okay. This is when you had people like Rakim, like KRS, Big Daddy Kane, Public Enemy, all these dope groups, but everyone's different. Everyone's kind of doing it their own way, but they're all adding on. They're adding on to the lexicon of rap. Doom is from that era. He's from that original era, So this is what happens when you let a guy just flourish and do his thing without some A&R dude breathing down his back. Or he had complete freedom. He had complete creative control over his art. And this is what we get when we unleash artists like that, So it's like that's basically how I would describe it. Like a lot of artists, there's artists who have been in the game for decades, but they're still kind of doing the same thing, because it's comfortable. It's a paycheck. You know what I'm saying? Doom was not concerned with any of that. He wasn't concerned about what he sampled. He didn't care about, he would do some villainous things too.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that a little bit. So let's, Doom is a god, but he's not a saint. And you do address some of that stuff. He was a bit of a scoundrel at times on a couple different levels. We don't have to get into all the levels, but you do talk about that. I want to know, one, if you could drop a couple of those things, but also were you at all afraid or worried or concerned? This is the first, extensive biography of Doom that people would be like, well, why do you have to put that in? Or, this changes my view of him. It makes me not like him as much or whatever. Were you worried about that at all?
Yeah, well, this is a good point to mention that the book is unauthorized. Okay. And what that means is the estate had nothing to do with this book. Okay. They, at the same time, I was very transparent with the estate. They knew I was doing it. My first author copies I sent to Jasmine, Doom's wife, with a personalized letter telling her why I did the book, and that I hold Doom in high esteem. But when you do an authorized version of someone's life, which the estate has control over, you're not necessarily going to get a realistic picture of the individual. And I'll give you an example. There was a documentary done recently on Prince for Netflix. Okay, 9-hour documentary. The estate opened up the archives, all of that old footage of Prince. And you know what? We're probably never going to see it. You know why? Because maybe they didn't depict Prince as the estate wanted him to, you know? So it's like, we're never going to see that. That's why I had to do this unauthorized. I mean, I did a Wu-Tang book unauthorized, and the fact that I'm still alive says a lot, right? Because if the Wu had not liked that book, they know where I live and everything like that. But yeah, with the Doom thing, I was, you know, I already people know stuff about him. Like one of the villainous things he did was the doombots, and that's taken straight out of the pages of Doctor Doom, Marvel Comics. At a certain point in Doom's career, the mask, which you see here, had become his identity. Like everyone was like enthralled about the mask, you know. It's like, ooh. So what Doom would do was like, if he didn't feel like doing a show, he would just give the mask to his buddy, like give it to Cullen and say, go rock that show for me, all right? And there's been so many times that I've talked to people and they're like, oh yeah, I was at a Doom show and like the guy on stage didn't look like Doom. And then like some dude taps me on the shoulder and it's Doom without the mask. And it's like, he was like that. He was a mischievous dude. He liked to pull things over on people, you know? And in the book, you'll find out that, you know, the Doombots might have started off as like a kind of a practical joke and everything. But in the book, you find out that he was having health issues. Sometimes he couldn't always make it to the show, but he didn't want to leave that money on the table, you know, because he had a family to support. He had 5 kids to support. A couple of them are special needs kids, you know. Doom was all about his family, all about looking after his people. So he'd give the mask to someone and, you know, they would do the show. And like sometimes the Doombot would be greeted with a whole bunch of rotten tomatoes. But what eventually happened was it didn't affect the attendance at Doom shows because people wanted to see if it was going to be the real Doom. So even a trick like that worked in his favor, you know. It's like you gotta love him for that, because I know how it is, you know, because I feel like I've done battle with the mainstream music industry all my life, and I know Doom felt that way, you know. So anytime that you can get over on people like that, or you know, more power to you, because the music industry is one of the most corrupt, crooked, manipulative businesses, and you know, I don't pass judgment on any artist who, you know, does something to fuck that whole paradigm up.
And I saw an interview where, and this may have been a bit of a post hoc explanation or excuse or whatever, but the way he spoke of the Doombots made a little bit of a sense to me, especially in relation to you speaking of him as a writer and him considering himself a writer, where he said, I wrote the rhymes, I set up the stage show, I defined the character. You don't expect the playwright to be on stage.
Exactly.
You know, and I think that's actually like an incredible innovation as in hip hop. And I wish he could have taken it further. But in a sense, we may see it get taken further, because now we're seeing live performances like at Camp Flog Gnaw last night, which some might be familiar with. Tyler, the creator, you know, puts on this festival every year. And there was a FM Mood performance, which was a Doom tribute without Doom.
Exactly. It's like Doom, you know, the same dude doesn't play Batman in every movie, you know? It's like, that's what Doom said.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why does it have to be me? And his whole thing is like, you should be coming here to hear the music, not to see a person. You know, it's like he was so into the artistry of it that he hated all the other shit around it, you know? So it's like, that was his way of dealing with it.
And I know we're getting ready for questions in a second, but before we get to that, let's touch on the end of his life, but also the peculiar circumstances of it. He ended his life in Leeds, England. Why was that?
Well, he was living in England at the time because he was actually born in Britain. So he had a British passport all his life. When his mother was pregnant with him, she went to go see her sister, who was living in England at the time.
And she was Trinidadian.
Yeah, they're both from Trini. Shout out to Trini. And while she was visiting her sister in London, she gave birth to Doom. When she comes back to the country, back to the US, she never gets Doom's paperwork straight. So Doom lives all his life in America. He goes on tour to Europe one time. Somehow he gets back in the country. The second time he goes on tour to Europe, which is like 2011, you know, he's coming back through customs. He's got the metal mask and in like a metal attache case. He's got a wad of cash from all the shows. Customs is like, who is this black guy with all this money and all this math? They punch him up in the computer, found out that he got into a fight, like you know, minor incident. Then they check out his immigration history, and what they did was they put him on a plane back to England. Can you believe that? He's got a house in Atlanta. He's got 5 kids and a wife living here, and all of a sudden, he finds himself living in England. So it took about 1.5 years for him to raise the money to bring his family over. And eventually, he brought his family over to live in England, but that's where he eventually died, in England. Unfortunately.
It's question time?
Yeah.
Let's go for it.
Got about 15 minutes for your questions. We ask that you direct them to that microphone or to this microphone so our audience who's watching online can hear them. We'll start over there.
There we go. Thank you. Good evening. So I think it's almost like a couple of days after the 20th anniversary of Food. And I just wanted to generally give you space to talk about Doom's politics. I think he spoke before a congressional hearing on anti-censorship. Also, Food, you know, it's got lines like, for a meal, do a commercial for Mellow Yellow, tell them devil's hell no, sell your own jello, you know. And our RFK's about to be the HHS head. You know, so it's like the politics of the house, or just any way you want to take that politics question, and also the Baltimore incident, Doom's Baltimore connection. So, thank you.
Yeah, you know what? I forgot to mention. I don't think I mentioned that in the book, did I? He was at a congressional.
The
congressional hearing.
Which is ironic. He couldn't vote.
What? He couldn't vote. Well, no, he was 19 when he did that.
No, but he couldn't vote because he wasn't.
Oh, right. He wasn't a citizen, right? Yeah, he did a hearing, a congressional hearing, like for Rock the Vote, back when he was 19.
It was about the motor voter bill.
Yeah, exactly.
We're old. I remember this big push for something called the motor voter bill because it was to enable it to be easier to register to vote. So the idea was that when you got your driver's license, you could register at that time. And so, yeah, him and Sub were in front of Congress speaking on that behalf. But the irony is that
he couldn't vote.
He couldn't vote. He could never vote.
I should mention also that Doom's father was from Zimbabwe. Okay, so he grew up under apartheid. He was an activist. Doom's father was an activist. He was also very smart. He was one of the few African students at that time who won a full scholarship to come study in the U.S. And believe me, that's not an easy thing to do. And when he was in the U.S., he started like the Martin Luther King Community Center in Long Beach. He was responsible for getting the first black policeman onto the Long Beach police force. So Doom kind of inherited that activism from his dad, you know. And even though Doom was a low-key activist, it's like he's not in your face with it, but you know, certain things like that, like the Rock the Vote and
and Lawrence, to your point about this sort of long-standing theme of his, which is about the food that you eat, you know, stop feeding babies colored sugar-coated lard squares. But he says even on a track called Ace in the Hole with Third Base, he says, no sugar sweet snacks for the sour saps. So like it goes through his entire career. There is certainly an irony to the fact that he's so insistent on people eating healthy and eating the right foods while being a complete lush, drinking anything you put in front of him, and also putting a bunch of other substances into his body if you listen to the track. my favorite ladies. So.
And also, he didn't follow his own advice. He was big into Mickey D's and stuff like that. So it's like,
Thank you. First of all, good evening. Excellent programming. When I was growing up, there was a figure, a jazz figure, you could say a rebel rouser himself, Gil Scott-Heron, who had some interesting ideas, similar to what Doom later on came and to develop. Did Doom, did he knew about Gil Scott-Heron's ideas, and did he pick up on any? And what would Heron say about, if he was still living today, you know, about Doom's efforts, everything he does with the mask and all? Thank you.
yeah, that's a great point. Gil Scott, we have some Gil Scott-Heron fans in that? Good, good. Definitely, Gil Scott was on the cutting edge, you know, and unfortunately, like Doom, he had a substance abuse problem, because I've actually interviewed Gil Scott, and like, he was fine when we were talking, but then he said, "Oh, I got to go to the bathroom for a second." When he came back from the bathroom, he was, you know, someone else. So unfortunately, Doom had that as well. You know, it's like, and you see that in a lot of artists. With this creativity comes also this self-destructive nature too. And Doom definitely had it. I mean, pretty much everyone I interviewed for the book told me that Doom was a functional alcoholic, you know. And I know what that's like, having, you know, in my family, people like that who are able to just, you know, completely do their job, get through life, but they just can't survive without that crutch, whatever it is, that substance, you know. And, you know, Doom was definitely one of those people. But I don't think I never came across any references where he.
Yeah, I'm a super
who's-
nerd about this stuff, and I haven't yet found a Doom reference to Gil Scott-Heron. However, in that vein, the Black Bastards album is incredibly influenced by this spoken word jazz record called The Blue Gorilla by Kane.
Guyland Kane, who was a member of the Last
of
Poets.
The Last Poets.
One of the original members of the Last Poets, yeah. And obviously Sun Ra, Madlib introduced Doom to Sun Ra, you know, the Afrofuturist, and you see a lot of Sun Ra in Doom too. He was like,
and you mentioning that you know, Madlib introducing the Sun Ra and him picking up on that, you know, that goes again to Doom being a constant learner. I found the interview where an interviewer introduced him to Charles Bukowski.
yes,
And then
I
10
know,
years
I know
later,
that I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
and then 10 years later, he's sampling Bukowski and talking about Bukowski in interviews. So he like didn't just nod and like move along. He actually listened and learned constantly.
he was a vacuum. He was a student of the universe. He just sucked up knowledge. And in the later years, he used to go down these YouTube rabbit holes and really get crazy on certain, you know, metaphysical concepts and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, you don't find too many people, period, who are like that, you know. Do we have a question over here?
Yes, sir. Good evening. Two quick questions. One dealing with KMD and the record label situation. Were they not able to come to terms with the artwork, change it maybe, or were they just steadfast on it has to be this or hit the road?
Yeah, I go into that pretty in depth in the book, and basically what happened was the whole Ice-T cop killer was a big issue at that thing for Time Warner. Time Warner owned WEA, Warner Electra Atlantic, which Doom was on, and it was a week before their board meeting, okay, when all this was happening. So the controversial artwork that we're talking about is basically a cartoon of Little Black Sambo being hung. And if you know anything about Little Black Sambo, it was like a racist stereotype. And by hanging him, Doom was basically hanging the stereotype, okay? I don't know why people did not get that. It was actually two black journalists who called it out. And because of that, it created this whole firestorm at Elektra. And they had a meeting with Doom and the A&R guy, and Doom was like, can't we change it? And they were like, no, we've made the decision already. And, that's just like this whole corporate mindset, it's just like, and I think that's like what Doom was fighting against the whole rest of his life, because it's like, who's some dude in a suit to tell me about my art and what I can put and what I can't put? It's like Doom is not promoting lynching. He's hanging a stereotype. So, you had another question?
Yeah, real quick. To this day, weekly, I listen to Food.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke about him using psychedelics. Could that have been the force behind creating such a brilliant concept album?
Only Doom would know that, but yeah, I think the psychedelics led to a lot of concepts, if you ask me. I mean, because Doom is a very unique mind in this hip hop thing, and I think definitely the psychedelics contributed to a lot of the weirder concepts. King Ghidorah, who represents himself as a three-headed dragon from outer space, only Doom could have pulled that off. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, good evening. With Doom being active during a time when there was such a clear divide between the underground and the mainstream hip hop scene, what do you think it was that may have insulated him from receiving the raft or even the dismissal of the music industry at the time? I mean, he was still able to, appear on mainstream platforms, and even with his often disparaging remarks about, mainstream artists and the mainstream culture, it seems like he was still accepted, in general. What do you think it was that insulated him from becoming, he displayed his own willful reclusiveness, but what do you think kept him from being blackballed even from the industry at the time?
That's a great question. And I've thought about that a lot myself, because you know what? Like, I think it was like 99. Was that Pharoah Monch, Simon Says?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Internal.
they sampled the same Godzilla movie, the song Simon Says by Pharoah Monch. And Monch, the sample detectives came after him and put the kibosh on that one. Meanwhile, Doom got away scot-free. I don't know. He had this weird ability to just stay under the radar, like to the mainstream, but like all his fans knew about what he was doing. And in that era from like 99 to 2005, he was like, you could ask anyone, he was like the underground king, right? I mean, no one else was as prolific as he was. And still he's able to like sample this really kind of a lot of kind of known stuff. No one came after him. I really couldn't explain it. I think it's just that Doom mystique. It's like he was somehow, as popular as he was somehow below the radar of the mainstream. But I did hear on one of those podcasts that like at some point Jay-Z was trying to sign him. I think that might have been later on in the 2000s, but and there's a story in the book also how Nas, like at one point, Doom and Nas were freestyling together in a hotel room in LA, and Nas was like completely blown away by this guy, even though they had known each other like way back, because Nas at that time was huge and Doom was kind of still underground.
They both came up through MC Search.
Exactly. That's a very good point. Yep. But I really could not answer that question. I'm sorry. It's just he had that ability to stay below the radar, but at the same time be popular.
You address it a little bit in reference to the Danger Doom project and the Adult Swim collaboration, and sort of how like there were just like some folks at Adult Swim who made the case for Doom to the corporate. He just had these people in his corner at these various points.
Yeah, but see, even that, like, Adult Swim was a TV network. That was like one of the first records they put out. So it's like, I don't think a lot of people were checking for it unless you were like an Adult Swim fan. Because I didn't, like, I had to.
But it was probably the biggest budget he ever got.
Oh, it was definitely the biggest budget and also the biggest sale. He sold about 350,000 copies of that record because there was actually promotion behind it, you know. Whereas like Mad Villainy, they say officially he sold maybe like 70,000 or something like that. So. Yes, sir. Yes.
Everything is streaming these days, and you know, Doom was doing what he was doing back when people were trading tapes, you know, selling, you know, things were being traded. Do you see any kind of artistry coming along in these days when with streaming and technology, everybody kind of has like a 20-second attention span, and they're not looking at the illusions, you know, the way he was wording things? Do you foresee any time where something could come like this again?
Where someone like Doom could come again? Oh, that's a tough question. I think Doom did it. Like you know, you have artists like Ma Kami who kind of wears the mask. You got people like Billy Woods, who's like very media shy. But as far as someone coming with that whole package and creating that whole mystique, that took a long time to do, you know, and it was very organic. Like, even though he had a plan to do it, it took years to execute, you know? So I don't know if there will ever be someone with that type of underground cachet who's still popular. To me, that's the thing about Doom. You know, it's like he was underground, but he was so popular. It's like that the two don't seem to exist except with this man right here. So I think anyone who even tries to emulate that is going to be busted for copying Doom. You know, it's like, and his fans are very protective of him. So.
Please help me thank tonight's moderator, Colin Elikowski. And this evening's author, S.H. Fernando, SKIZ. Now the most important part, you're going to purchase.